My wife, Michelle, figured I was clueless about her secret intentions. She assumed I was too dim, or at least oblivious, to notice her growing romance with Greg, her coworker. Michelle seemed convinced I'd just sit back and let her make a fool of me, thinking I'd stomach her affair with him just to stay married. Boy, was she in for a surprise. Unbeknownst to her, I'd been suspicious for quite a while. I'd picked up on all the red flags of her cheating, stuff like staying late at work all the time, sprucing up her closet with new clothes, getting snappy with me, and losing interest in everything we used to love together. On multiple occasions, I tried sitting her down to talk about what was going on, but she brushed me off every single time. Of course, Michelle swore up and down that nothing was wrong. She chalked it up to me being paranoid or overly clingy. So, I felt like I had no choice but to bring in a private investigator. I wasn't about to stay in the dark about what was really happening. From day one of our relationship, I'd been crystal clear that I'd never put up with infidelity, and I'd driven that point home plenty of times over our 10-year marriage. So, there I was, sitting in the office of Eric Stone, private eye, with a knot in my stomach as he handed me his report. Relief washed over me when he said Michelle hadn't crossed the line into cheating. But that comfort didn't last long, because he tacked on a gut punch, yet. As he laid it out, my wife was caught up in a romantic fling with Greg. It just hadn't turned physical, though it was only a matter of time before it did. Apparently, Michelle and Greg were what some folks call work spouses. Man, I despise that phrase. To me, Michelle had one spouse, me, and that's it. Some might think the term is cute or no big deal, but to me, it screamed that she was getting way too close to another guy. And, as it turned out, that's exactly what was happening. According to Stone's report, Michelle and Greg had lunch together every day, just the two of them, cozy as could be. They'd hold hands, sit practically on top of each other, and he even had photos of them hugging and sneaking the occasional kiss. Seeing those pictures made my blood boil. I wanted to wring Greg's smug neck. On top of the lunches, those two would stay late at work together all the time, even when there was no real reason to. It was like they were dodging going home to their actual spouses, squeezing out every second they could to be together. Stone told me he'd managed to peek at Michelle's emails and texts. I knew it was shady and totally illegal, and I couldn't use any of it if we ended up in divorce court, but in our state, proving adultery for a divorce was tough anyway. No-fault divorces were way simpler, so I didn't need the evidence for that. I just wanted to know the truth for myself. Stone wouldn't let me have copies of the messages or even glance at them. Instead, he gave me a rundown of what they said. He swore Michelle never badmouthed me, which was something, I guess. A couple of times, Greg tried talking trash about me, but Michelle shut him down. I suppose it could have been worse. The texts and emails made it clear they were romantically entangled, even if they hadn't said, "I love you," yet. Their chats were super personal, teetering on inappropriate flirting. Greg had sent Michelle some explicit photos, and she seemed all too happy to get them, even sending back some revealing shots of herself. From what Stone could tell, she hadn't gone full-on graphic with her pictures, at least not yet. As I sat there in his office, mulling over what to do next, Stone dropped the worst bombshell yet. Greg's wife was heading out of town for a 3-day weekend to visit her mom. Michelle and Greg saw it as their big chance to finally take their relationship to the next level. The only thing standing in their way was me. They were racking their brains, trying to figure out how to spend the night together without me around. With me sticking around town, pulling off their plan was going to be a real challenge. They tossed around a bunch of ideas to make it work. One scheme was for Michelle to spin a tale about heading off for a girls-only weekend getaway. She worried I'd call up one of her pals and uncover the lie, and she wasn't keen on roping anyone else into her cover story, so that plan got scrapped. Then they thought about nudging me to leave town instead. I had to chuckle bitterly, recalling how Michelle casually suggested I put together a golf trip with my buddies. I wasn't biting, so that idea crashed and burned too. In the end, they settled on a bold, straightforward tactic, just laying it all out. Greg was convinced I was some pathetic husband to be humiliated who'd do anything to keep Michelle as my devoted wife, even if it meant letting her fool around with him. Somehow, he sold Michelle on the crazy idea that her affair with him would actually spice up our marriage and make things better between us. He persuaded her that all she needed to do was come clean about her plans with him, and I'd cave and let it happen. Obviously, that smug jerk didn't know me at all, but what floored me was that Michelle fell for his garbage. She had to know I'd never stand for it. If she didn't get that, then she was seriously out of touch with reality. Stone told me that was all the dirt he had, so I took his report and headed home. I asked him to keep tabs on Michelle's texts and emails and give me a heads up if anything new popped up. Come Friday, Stone rang me up and said Michelle was gearing up to confront me the following Monday after work. Her plan was to announce she was going out with Greg that Friday night for a date. It'd kick off with dinner and dancing but wrap up with them getting hot and heavy in a hotel room all night. Thoughtfully, she'd come back home to me on Saturday, or maybe Sunday, depending on how much fun they were having. Michelle and Greg had practiced her whole speech, convincing themselves I'd just roll over and agree to it. They figured I'd be pissed, maybe even furious at first, but Michelle was ready to soothe me by saying it was a one-off deal, even though they both knew that was a lie. She was going to dangle the promise of being intimate with me afterward, like some kind of consolation prize for being such a good sport. Since Michelle and I hadn't been close in months, she assumed I'd be so desperate for any scrap of affection, even after her night with Greg, that I'd go along with her plan. How sweet of them to consider my feelings. I had just 2 days to get ready for this showdown. Michelle and Greg, laughing it off as the intervention, were in for a rude awakening if they thought it'd go their way. I decided I'd flip their little intervention into my own smackdown. I spent the whole weekend running through different scenarios, trying to nail down what I'd do and whether I could salvage my marriage. First, I had to figure out if I even wanted to save it. Honestly, I wasn't sure I did. As I wrestled with my feelings for Michelle, my next step started coming together naturally. I made up my mind to face it head on and put an end to things for good. Back when Michelle and I first tied the knot, we were over the moon. We were glued at the hip, sharing every little moment life threw at us. She was my closest confidant and my greatest love. But somehow, that magic just slipped away. Maybe that's just how it goes, nothing stays perfect forever. Maybe my take on marriage was a bit old school, picturing us as this unstoppable duo, tackling life's ups and downs together. Both Michelle and I had been married before, and those didn't work out either. If this marriage tanked too, maybe the issue wasn't just us. Maybe the whole idea of marriage was the problem. How can anyone expect to keep the spark, the dreams, the hobbies, and the fire alive when life's always throwing curveballs and reshaping who we are? In a world obsessed with quick hits, ever-changing trends, social media, and getting everything now, maybe marriage is just outdated, like flip phones or VHS tapes. For a moment, I wondered if Michelle wanted Greg so bad, maybe I should just step aside and let her go. Then I shook myself out of that fog and got real. No way was I going to let her make a fool of me. I might be done with her, but I'd be damned if I'd let Greg swoop in and steal my wife like some kind of trophy. Forget that noise, I was ready to stand my ground. When Michelle called me right after lunch on Monday, I picked up and said, "Hey, Michelle, what's up? You never call me at work anymore. Everything all right?" "Hi, honey," she replied. Honey? Seriously? Did she toss that word around with Greg too? "Nothing's wrong," she went on. "I just need to know you'll be home on time tonight. There's something big we've got to talk about, so I really need you there." "Alright, cool," I said, then added, "That works, 'cause I've got some major news to share too. I'll probably be home around 5:15. That good?" She went quiet for a second, then tried to pry. "Major news? What's that about?" she asked. "I'll fill you in tonight," I said, ready to wrap it up. "Look, I gotta bounce, I'm slammed with my monthly report and need to finish it to get out on time. Catch you at home." I hung up, then headed to my boss's office to tell him I was taking the rest of the day off. He was cool with it, which was a relief. I had some prep work to do for this showdown. By 5:27, I was parked at the kitchen table when I heard the garage door rumble open. My nerves were shot, but I was also fuming inside. I worked hard to keep a cool, calm front while my emotions were a raging mess underneath. I had a chilled bottle of Sauvignon Blanc on the table, 2 glasses ready to pour. A couple of minutes later, the door swung open, and Michelle walked in alone, tossing her keys and purse on the counter. Thank God she didn't drag Greg along, that would have made this way messier. I flashed a smile. "Hey, honey," I said, throwing her earlier pet name back at her. "Good to see you. You need a minute to settle in, or you want to dive right into this talk?" My eagerness to jump in caught her off guard. She probably thought we'd ease into it later and wasn't ready for me to hit the ground running. I wasn't about to let her take control. My plan was to keep her off balance and unprepared. She had her whole speech scripted out, so I needed to shake things up. I didn't expect you to be ready and waiting like this," Michelle said, walking over and plopping down across from me, "but yeah, I guess the sooner we start, the sooner we can move on with our night. I'd like to kick things off with my news, if that's cool with you." "You mind?" I asked, my tone firm. No," she replied, sounding unsure. "Go ahead." "Awesome. Want some wine?" I asked, not waiting for her answer before pouring 2 glasses and sliding one her way. "Yeah, that sounds good," she said, letting out a heavy sigh as she grabbed the glass and downed half of it. I refilled her glass the second she set it down. "So, here's the deal," I started. "I've been thinking long and hard about this, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. No point in dragging it out." I paused on purpose, letting the silence build some pressure. It did the trick. Michelle leaned forward, eyes locked on me, hanging on my next words. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tense. "I'm done, Michelle. I want a divorce," I said flat out, then paused to let it hit her. It took maybe 3 seconds for her to process it. Her face was like an open book, cycling through emotions, first confusion, like she couldn't quite grasp what I'd said. Then it clicked, and shock took over. Pretty soon, fear crept in, like she was panicking I might have caught wind of her thing with Greg. "Why is that?" she asked, her voice shaky, dreading what I'd say next. "I don't love you anymore," I told her straight. It was like I'd punched her in the gut. "You what?" she stammered, grappling with my words. "I'm not in love with you anymore, Michelle." "I can't pinpoint exactly when it faded," I said, fudging the truth. I knew the exact moment. "It's been building for a while." I tried to push it down, pretend it wasn't there, but lately, it's just too obvious to ignore. "What are you even saying?" she asked, her eyes glistening like she was about to break down. Her reaction caught me off guard. "Do you remember the early days, right after we got married?" I asked her. "Think back to how we were inseparable. No matter what, grabbing groceries, catching a movie, hitting the mall, we did it together, like we couldn't stand being apart." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember," she said softly. "We both had jobs, but we'd make it a point to meet up for lunch at least a couple times a week. I'd count down the hours at work, itching to get home to you. I'd walk in, kiss you, and more often than not, we'd end up tangled up together. We shared everything. You dragged me to those goofy pottery classes, and you know what? I secretly loved it." "I thought you couldn't stand those classes," Michelle said, staring at me, surprised. "It wasn't about the clay," I explained. "It was about being with you, sharing that moment. I loved watching you get into it, helping you out, soaking up your excitement. Same deal with those little Christmas village houses we painted. We bought a bunch of those tiny, plain buildings and spent hours making them our own for a holiday display. It was a pain, but man, we had fun. Your houses always looked better than mine," she said quietly. Think about all those nights we sat right here at this table, dabbing paint on those little roof tiles, I said, and she nodded again. I was so in love with you back then. And those huge posters you got from our Myrtle Beach trip. We'd spend hours coloring them together, way before adult coloring books were a thing. We've still got a ton of those pens somewhere, but like our love, they've all gone dry. Michelle flinched, like my words stung. My love hasn't gone dry, she shot back, defensive. I didn't take the bait and kept going. All our friends used to go on about how jealous they were of us. We were always together. We'd take long walks every day, holding hands. If I had to zip to the hardware store for weed whacker string, you'd come along. If you wanted to shop for clothes, I'd be there, waiting outside the fitting room. Yeah, but you hated that, she pushed back. You were always glued to your phone, not even looking at the clothes. You're right, I wasn't, I admitted. I didn't care what you wore, you looked amazing in anything. I was there to be with you. I could have stayed home watching the game. Remember how the other women in the neighborhood were always doing bunco nights or girls' outings? You never wanted in. Do you remember what you told me when I asked why you didn't go? Michelle brushed a tear from her cheek. Yeah, I remember. I said I'd rather hang out with you than waste time with a bunch of gossipy women. Plenty of evenings, we'd snuggle up under a blanket and pop in You've Got Mail, I said, leaning back in my chair. I still love that movie, Michelle said, her voice cracking as she fought back tears. We must have watched it 100 times, easy, I said, topping off her wine glass again. I still want to watch it with you, Michelle blurted out, her eyes welling up. I don't want a divorce. I pictured us growing old together, taking cooking classes, trying out ballroom dancing, or just lounging in bed with our books, whatever, as long as we were side by side. But we've drifted so far apart, Michelle. I can't even say exactly when it started, I said, locking eyes with her, letting the weight of it sink in. We went from grabbing lunch together 2 or 3 times a week to barely managing one lunch date. That shift was all Michelle's doing. She'd told me one day she was too busy to leave the office for lunch so often. That was a flat-out lie, she was still eating out, just with someone else. Then, before long, our lunches together stopped completely. I started eating with my coworkers, and honestly, I probably got too comfortable with their company. I was laying it on a bit thick, but I was careful not to point fingers at Michelle. I didn't want her getting defensive and turning this into a fight. If this talk went south, it'd just be a shouting match, and that wasn't my plan, not yet. Getting home early to hang out stopped mattering as much. We both started staying late at work, coming home exhausted or distracted, barely connecting. Why didn't you ever say something? Michelle asked, her voice sharp with frustration. If I'd known it meant that much to you, I would have made time for lunch or cut back on late nights. You're not wrong, I said, nodding along. I did bring it up, over and over, but I wish I'd figured out why spending time with me didn't seem to matter to you anymore. Maybe if I had, I could have changed something, done something different to make you want to be around me. I dropped the ball there, big time. I was playing it like I was owning our drift, even though that was far from the truth. If I threw Greg in her face now, this would turn ugly fast, and I'd never get her to see my perspective. She'd just paint me as some jealous, controlling jerk. Before I spilled what I knew, I needed her to think back on what we had and face her part in wrecking it. Little by little, we stopped doing pretty much everything together. You started hitting up girls' nights out. I got into poker nights with the guys. You'd spend weekends at the spa, and I'd be out on the golf course. Michelle, we could go days without even having a real conversation, nothing deeper than small talk about the weather or whatever was on the news. Our love life took a hit too. We were always too worn out or just not feeling it. When we first got married, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. We were intimate 4, 5 times a week, sometimes multiple times a day. I'd sneak up behind you while you were cooking, and we'd ditch dinner to make love all night. We'd hop in the hot tub constantly, always getting up to some spicy fun. We haven't even fired that thing up in over a year. I thought you weren't interested in intimacy anymore, Michelle said, throwing it back at me. I had no clue where she got that idea, probably just her way of justifying her own actions by pinning it on me. No way, I said, letting out a dry laugh. I never stopped wanting intimacy. I'm just as wired for it now as I was a decade ago. But somewhere along the line, I stopped wanting to be intimate with you. I knew that one would sting. She thought she was the one shutting me down, and here I was saying our distance was because I didn't desire her anymore. It's almost funny, except it hurts like hell. What? Michelle asked, her voice breaking, clearly thrown by my words. You heard me, I said bluntly. I lost all desire to be intimate with you. You were like a stranger in bed, just going through the motions. You didn't want to try anything fun or spicy anymore. It felt like you just wanted to get it over with so you could move on to something else, like scrolling on your phone. I kept craving those wild, weekend-long sessions we used to have, but I ended up just faking it to get through. No way, you didn't, Michelle shot back, defensive. Sorry, Michelle, I said, twisting the knife a bit. It's not you, it's me. She stared at me, her face flushed, maybe from anger, maybe embarrassment, I couldn't tell. Her tears had stopped for now. I refilled her empty wine glass, and she grabbed it, taking a long gulp. It was only a matter of time, I went on, before we'd start looking for someone else to fill that void. I didn't mean it, but I wanted her to think I did. Out of nowhere, she snapped, her voice sharp. Are you stepping out on me? Did you fall for someone else? Michelle, you know where I stand on cheating, I said, keeping my tone steady. I made a vow to you when we got hitched, and I don't take that lightly. Your first husband betrayed you, and my first wife stabbed me in the back with a coworker. I'd never put you through that, and I know you'd never stoop so low as to try to make a fool of me with another guy. How could you even think I'd do something like that? I'm sorry, she said, her voice small, eyes dropping to the table, hands trembling. She looked like guilt was eating her alive. I'm waiting until the divorce is final before I start anything with anyone, I said, dropping a heavy hint that I had someone waiting in the wings. Which brings me back to my big news. I've already sat down with a lawyer and got the divorce papers ready. You'll get served on Friday. Hold on, what? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. You'll get the papers on Friday, I repeated, fighting a smirk. It's the best move for both of us. You'll be free to do whatever you want, and so will I. We can both admit the last 10 years were a bust and move forward. They weren't a bust for me, she fired back, her voice sharp. Come on, Michelle, I said, leaning in. Let's be honest. You haven't wanted to be with me for a long time. Our marriage was a mistake. I'm not the guy you want anymore. Yes, you are, she insisted, her voice rising. I don't want a divorce. You can't just end it because you feel like it. I want to stay married to you forever. I love you. I'm sorry, Michelle, but I don't love you anymore, I said, keeping my tone firm. This is a no-fault divorce state, so we'll just split everything down the middle, 50-50ths. Sure, someone could try to get more than half if they could prove the other cheated, but neither of us is fooling around, and we're not likely to before Friday, right? So, we'll make it clean. I'd like you to come with me to the bank tomorrow so we can split up our accounts evenly. We'll need new accounts, new credit cards, and we'll have to switch the utilities. Plus, we'll need to sell the house. I've got a realtor coming by Wednesday to list it. Wait. Michelle shouted, her voice breaking. You're going too fast. I don't know what to do. Please, slow down. Tears started streaming down her face again. Don't stress, I said calmly. I've already packed my stuff and booked a hotel room to stay in until I find a permanent place. You can keep the house until it sells. Hold on, Damn it. Michelle yelled, her voice raw. Please, just wait. No reason to drag this out, I said, keeping my tone steady. We're done, right? Let's get everything sorted before Friday, yeah. What's so damn special about Friday? Michelle snapped, her voice sharp with suspicion. Friday's when you're heading out with your boyfriend, Greg, isn't it? I said coolly. The big night you two have planned to shack up at a hotel, right? Michelle went stone still, her eyes wide like she'd seen a ghost, her mouth gaping like she couldn't catch her breath. She tried to say something, but all that came out was a choked stutter. Did I mix up the date? I said, reaching under a pile of Better Homes and Gardens magazines to pull out a manila folder. I flipped it open, grabbed the private investigator's summary sheet, and slid it across the table toward her. I tapped the section detailing her Friday plans with Greg. Nope, got it right. Says here you and Greg booked a room at the Gaylord Texan for this Friday night. It's not, she started, but I didn't let her finish. Not what it seems. I cut in, raising an eyebrow. Want me to pull out the photos of you and Greg locking lips over lunch? Her tears started flowing again as she stared at me, speechless. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Now I remember exactly when I stopped loving you, I said, a grim smile spreading across my face. It was the day I found out you were scheming to make a fool of me with your coworker, just like my ex-wife did. I'm sorry, honey, she pleaded, desperation in her voice. I don't love Greg. It was just supposed to be a one-time thing, a way to shake things up for us. I'd spend the night with him, then you and I could spend the rest of the weekend reconnecting, like we used to. Greg said you'd be into it, that it'd fire you up and bring back the spark in our marriage. Oh, sure, that's the ticket to fixing our love life, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Instead of getting hot and heavy with me, you go have an affair with some other guy. Brilliant plan. No, I mean, she stammered, grasping for words before switching gears. Greg said you'd be okay with it if you wanted me to be happy. I do want you to be happy, I said, leaning forward. Happy with me, like we used to be. Not running off to find happiness with some other man. Did you lose your mind or something? How could you possibly think I'd be fine with this? You know how I feel about cheating. I knew, but, she fumbled, searching for an excuse. It wouldn't be cheating. It's not infidelity if you gave me the green light. Not in a million years, I shot back. I see that now, she said, her voice trembling. I should have known all along. I don't know what got into me. I think I was just lonely and bored. Greg made me feel alive again. Lonely and bored? I said, raising my voice. How could you be lonely and bored when we were supposed to be in love, spending all our time together? I don't know, she started again, floundering. Did it ever cross your mind that you felt lonely and bored because you pushed me away? I pressed. You stopped meeting me for lunch. You stopped hanging out with me, doing the things we loved. You chose to shut me out and put yourself in that spot. You picked spending time with him over me. So if you were lonely and bored, you set that stage yourself so Greg could swoop in and fix it. I don't think I did that, she said, staring at me, shaking her head. No, I can't believe I'd do something like that. I thought you were the one who stopped coming to lunch with me because you told me to. Don't you remember? You kept saying you were too busy. Then one Wednesday, our lunch date day, I showed up to pick you up, and you didn't even come down to the lobby to tell me you couldn't make it. You sent me a text saying to go eat lunch without you, Michelle said, her voice shaky. After that, I stopped showing up, and you never once mentioned that we weren't having lunch anymore. I don't think you even noticed. She stared down at her hands, avoiding my eyes. You were too wrapped up in your own world to see you were losing me. You were all about you and Greg. Well, now you can have him. I don't want Greg, she snapped, her head jerking up to meet my gaze. I want you. I want us, the way things used to be. I'm sorry I screwed everything up. I gave up on us. It's too late for that, I said, shaking my head slowly. You can't mean that, she pleaded. I haven't cheated on you. Nothing's happened. I'll never see him again, I swear. I'll quit my job, find somewhere else to work. Please, I can't lose you. I still love you. You've betrayed me in every way a wife can, short of one, and that's the big one, I said, my voice firm. We stopped being intimate. I was an idiot, caught up in Greg's charm. I didn't love him. You're the only one I've ever loved. I don't know what got into me. I would have gotten over him and come back to you once I worked it out of my system. But it's done now. I see how stupid it was. I was stupid. Greg means nothing to me. Please, baby, don't walk away from me. It's not that simple, Michelle, I said, unmoved. Why can't it be? She cried. I messed up, I know, but you stopped me before I crossed the line. You crossed the line already, I shot back. Going all the way would have just been the final nail. I didn't do anything. We were just friends, she insisted, her voice rising. You were supposed to be my best friend, not his, I countered. I've got plenty of women friends. I don't kiss them. I don't ditch our time together to hang out with them. I never replaced you with any of them, and I sure as hell never schemed to have an affair with one and try to bully you into being okay with it. Michelle buried her face in her hands, sobbing hard. I'll never take you for granted again, I promise. Can't we just call this a huge mistake? Can't you forgive me and give me one more shot? This isn't a board game where you get a free pass, I said. You didn't just slip up. You turned your back on our love and gave your affection to another guy. No, he never had my heart, she said, her voice breaking. My heart's always been yours. But you were ready to give him your body? I asked, my tone sharp. I didn't, though. You stopped me, she said, desperation in her eyes. Damn it, don't you love me enough to fight for me? Do I mean so little to you? You were everything to me, I said, my voice low. I would have taken on anyone for you. I would have laid down my life for you. Now. I wouldn't lift a finger to help you out of a jam. Michelle let out a gut-wrenching wail, grabbing my hands and trying to pull me closer. No, please, you can't mean that. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You've got to believe me. I do believe you're sorry, I said, pulling my hands back. That at least tells me you're not some heartless, self-obsessed monster. Then can you give me another chance, she begged, tears streaming down her face. Please, I'm pleading with you. Don't throw me away. I'm not the one throwing you away, Michelle, I said. You did that yourself. I believe you're sorry, I really do. Maybe one day I'll find a way to forgive you, but it doesn't change the facts. I don't love you anymore. It's over. But hey, you've always got Greg to lean on. Greg's married, she sobbed, her voice barely audible. He just wanted a fling. He didn't want anything real with me. I let out a dry laugh. Well, Greg might rethink things now. I bet his wife had plenty to say when he got home today. She and I are working with the same divorce attorney. Michelle's jaw dropped, her face frozen in shock. I slid the manila folder across the table toward her. Everything's in here, the investigator's full report, the pictures of you and Greg. His wife got a copy too. You'll also find all the details from my lawyer about the divorce and how we plan to split our assets. I'd take a good look if I were you. No, honey, please, she begged, her voice breaking. Don't do this to us. If you want to hit the bank with me tomorrow to sort out the accounts, just give me a call, I said, standing up from the table and heading for the door, her sobs echoing behind me as I left the house. Michelle tried to fight the divorce, but I wasn't budging. I had no interest in a long, costly court battle. When the judge brought up marriage counseling, I shut it down politely but firmly. I was through. The divorce moved fast and didn't pull punches. The investigators detailed evidence of Michelle's emotional affair with Greg, plus her scheme to cheat, tipped the scales heavily in my favor. The court handed me 65% of our shared assets, the house, and a hefty chunk of alimony. Michelle was crushed. Greg's wife didn't waste a second, she divorced him as soon as she got the investigators' report. His career tanked when HR caught wind of his inappropriate fling with a married coworker. He got fired, and his professional contacts dropped him like a hot potato. Michelle kept trying to patch things up with me, calling, texting, even showing up at my office, but I was long gone. I signed up for those pottery classes we used to do together, but this time, I went alone, rediscovering a sense of freedom and peace in doing things for myself. About 6 months after the divorce, I met Anna, another potter in my ceramics class. She was warm, genuine, and full of zest for life. We started going out, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living again. We'd crack jokes about my old marriage, and she respected how much I valued loyalty and honesty. A year later, Michelle called me out of the blue. She was pregnant, not with my kid. Greg had dumped her after his own divorce, leaving her broke and emotionally wrecked. I listened without a shred of pity, wished her the best, and hung up. The next spring, Anna and I tied the knot. We bought a new place, far from my old neighborhood. We painted Christmas village houses together, signed up for ballroom dancing lessons, and binged romantic comedies. But the real magic was building a relationship grounded in trust, mutual respect, and real love. Sometimes, life has a funny way of serving up justice right when you need it. And you know what? Sometimes, that's what happens when you choose to love yourself first. And that wraps up my story for today. If you liked it, give it a nod of approval and maybe share a thought or two below. Your support helps spread the word. If you're just joining in, make sure to stick around for more stories like this, it keeps me going. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.